Today we're going to cover the remaining tabs of the acoustic area condition properties. So now we're on the insulation tab, and you'll notice that we provide an option for you for batts insulation and rigid insulation. If you need batts, simply turn it on, populate your thickness and the width, and then choose the type from the predefined list. If the predefined list does not have your option, you can simply add a new option by clicking the copy and insert button, or you can click the blue plus here at the top. Once you have your batts set up, you're good to go ahead and move to the next, which is your rigid insulation. For the rigid insulation, we will have the thickness provided for you. Go ahead and fill that out if you need to change it. And then your width and length is going to be the board size that you're ordering. Ultimately, you will need to go ahead and assign a type for this as well. So choose your type and you're ready to move forward. The drywall tab we covered in the general video, but ultimately if you were going to be using board instead of acoustic tile, you would simply come in here and turn that on, and the acoustic tile would get turned off. The next tab we have is our increment tab. So with the increment, we have 4 different methods for you. Now, the different methods really come into play when you're looking at congruent shapes versus non-congruent shapes. However, with congruent shapes, there is a little bit of a difference between true and ratio, add-on, and median. Now, true is ignoring all of the increment information that you're filling out down here at the bottom. True is saying whatever I draw on the takeoff screen is what I want to see when I access my pricing and labor. Whereas ratio, add-on, and median are ultimately going to be looking at the increments here. So if we were to measure, for example, a 10-foot, 2-inch room, that would take and go ahead and round us up to where we would be getting in total 12 lineal footage of tile on both sides, or on all 4 sides. So make sure that you're going through and depending on the method you choose is going to depend on if you're going to get the increment or if you're going to get just specifically what you drew on the takeoff screen. That is when you're dealing with congruent shapes. Now, if you're dealing with non-congruent shapes, the difference between ratio, add-on, and median is one is going to be a little bit more, one is going to be a little bit lower, and median is going to be right in the middle, giving you basically the average. So, and it's not very noticeable, but if you do want to go ahead and take a look at it, draw yourself a triangle or a trapezoid out on your takeoff screen, and then go ahead and take a look at the items as you swap through the different mathematical approximates for laying out your room. Continuing down, when looking at that mathematical approximate and using the increments, the horizontal increment is basically saying, whenever I hit my increment above, I want you to round to the next 2-foot tile. And the vertical increment is doing the same. If you didn't want it to go to that size, you're more than welcome to go ahead and change it. And you'll notice that in this case, our increment above is 1 inch. So if you were to go ahead and measure 10 feet 1 inches, well then it would go ahead and give you that additional 2 foot that you're telling it to increment. Moving down this waste percentage, the waste percentage is a percentage of the wasted area when you're looking at those non-congruent shapes. Again, if you're looking at just typically most of the time those congruent shapes, the waste isn't going to really come into play, so you don't even really need to worry about it too much. Continuing to the right, you have a scaffold field. Now this scaffold is for incrementing. It'll turn on the scaffold for you, so that way you can calculate a little extra money. And this is all going to be based on the ceiling height. So if you wanted to change this, hey, at 10 feet, we want to calculate scaffold. It's going to look at the general tab, the ceiling height field, and it's going to use that to determine whether you need that scaffold line turned on in your project or not. You don't have to use this. If you're not going to use it, feel free to go ahead and turn it off. If you are going to use it, make sure that you choose the correct scaffold type, whether it's rolling or standing, whatever it may be. To the right, you have your wall molding. Now this is an increment for your wall molding, so that way, if you had a 10-foot room, you're not cutting off 2 feet of wall molding in the program thinking that you're going to use that 2 feet somewhere else. In most cases, you may end up using it, but if you get to your last room, you want to make sure that you have full sticks of wall molding. So what the increment 2 and the increment above are for is to make sure that as you're drawing these rooms, if you hit a certain measurement, it's going to drop that additional extra lineal footage off of that wall molding and start to produce a new stick for you, so that way you're not piecemealing the very last room. In this case, one of the more recommended paths that we would say is you can say increment to 12 feet because you're going to be producing a 12-foot stick, and then increment above can be either 9 or 10 feet. So if you were to run, a 10-foot room, it's going to drop to 2 foot and you'll be okay. If you were to run something like a 12-foot room, one piece will cover you. But if you run something like a 16-foot room, you want to make sure that you're going to have 2 longer pieces in there and not something shorter. So ultimately, if you go in and you change this increment above and you say 9 feet, if you measure 10 lineal foot of a room, well, it's going to give you a 9-foot stick, and then it's going to give you a 1-foot stick after that. So just keep that in mind as you're going through and measuring with this. It's usually meant for those larger rooms when you're going to have multiple runs of wall molding. If you don't want to use the increment above in the increment 2, you don't have to, so you can just simply turn it off. The next tab that you have is your Seismic tab. Looking at Seismic, if you want to use Seismic, simply click the checkbox, verify your structure height is accurate, and then you'll use your struts and your Seismic wire here. Now ultimately, the number of struts per the square footage, that's kind of like an industry standard that we have set up in here. If you needed to change it, feel free to change the number of struts per square footage that you're measuring. Continuing down, you're going to have your strut type. Simply click your 3-dotted button and choose from the list that you have out there. Continuing down, you're producing the strut length. And if you're going to cut that strut length down, feel free to go ahead and tell us what you're going to cut that to so we can give you the correct count out on your pricing screen. If you need fasteners for the strut, you'll use the checkbox here. Tell us how many fasteners you would like to produce, the length of that fastener, the type of the fastener, and if it comes in a box, how many come in a box. If you don't fill out your pieces per carton, you will get individual piece pricing out on the pricing screen. Continuing to the right, you have your Seismic wire. Fill this information out as needed. Here's your wire length, here's where you're cutting it to, and ultimately the gauge of wire you're using. If you need fasteners for those wires, go ahead and click the Use Fasteners. Tell us the fastener length, the fastener type, and how many pieces come in a box. You do have perimeter attachment capabilities over here on the side as the last option for you. In the perimeter attachment capabilities, you're telling us what your centers are and how many wires you would like to drop per center. Your area attachment is how much square footage are you producing. In this case, it's the same as the strut. And how many wires would you like to drop per area. If you do want to have some additional wires available, you can fill out the miscellaneous wire count. It will give you an additional drawing tool on the takeoff screen for you to be able to go add those additional miscellaneous wires for your seismic setup. Now that's going to cover you on the Seismic tab. Continuing forward, you have your Count tab, and realistically the Count tab is an additional labor tab. If you were to use the Count tab and turn any one of these fields on, we're asking you to tell us a number. Most of the time it's 1, but realistically this is the number per count. So if you were to go into your drawing screen, we'll give you a new tool depending on which count icon you turn on here. And with that drawing tool, you'll be able to go count sprinkler heads or speaker cutouts or fire alarms or that type of information. Now again, all this is doing is giving you an additional labor line, so that way you can count this information on your project if you wanted to. You could type in the number 1 and go count 200 cutouts, or you could type in the number 200 and go place it one time. The difference being is that if you type in the number 1 and you go count the 200 cutouts, you can place them specifically where they are on the set of plans. The downside with putting in 200 and going and clicking one time is they'll all be located in the same spot. But again, this is just an additional labor field for you. That's all we're calculating when you look at this info. The last and final tab you have is your Miscellaneous tab. And just like all of your other condition properties, this is just a catch-all. Whatever we haven't calculated material, labor, equipment, subcontractor, or otherwise inside of this condition, this is where you would add it in. Simply click the Add button in the bottom left-hand corner. Fill out the information as a ratio setup. So if I measure 1 square foot, how much of my product do I need to get? Your product is going to be based on the estimated unit. Make sure that the estimated unit is specific to the item that you're wanting to build or look at. If the estimated unit is incorrect, you will not see the item out there because we're pulling in the items specifically based on the estimated unit that they're created under. So make sure that you verify your estimated unit before you continue forward with your miscellaneous item. But as you go through, make sure you click your 3-dotted button and fill out your description, and then fill out the per and the C quantity based on what you need. The last option you have here is your cost types, and really this is where you're going to see that line item appear either on your pricing or labor screen. Now, if you have any additional questions as it pertains to filling out your acoustic area condition properties, please feel free to reach out to us on the tech line and we'd be happy to assist you in any way we can. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.